Hi, I am Rachel Meliotis, a senior editor at O'Reilly Media, and I am here with William Sanders. He is a professor at the University of Hartford and the author of many books, 45 I think, in the technical area, and his latest one with us is Learning PHP Design Patterns.
Well, hi, Rachel. Good to see you.
Thank you for joining me. So I'll dive right in. First question is really basic. What is a design pattern and why do they exist?
Well, they were developed to deal with recurring problems, and they were a solution to problems that kept occurring. They first were came up in architecture, and there were architecture kind of issues, and they had different solutions for them, and these were called design patterns. Christopher Alexander is the author of the original book on general design patterns.
So understandable. So tell me a little bit about what is a PHP design pattern.
Okay, PHP design pattern, essentially it's programming design patterns that are applied to PHP. And the way I like to think about them are, people say, oh, they're reusable kinds of things, and people think they're like cut and paste types of solutions, and they're not. They're more like things like loops or conditional statements. I mean, we reuse those all the time, and in fact, I don't think we'd know what to do without them. And design patterns are this on a larger scale, and they're tied into object-oriented programming. But they really have the same sense to it as any other kind of structure, except they are on sort of a meta level types of structures connected into object-oriented programming.
So you talked a little bit about PHP design patterns, loops and stuff like that. Can you give me some more examples about what would be a particular one that would really help in a PHP project?
Well, the way they're set up, they're connected into object-oriented programming, and as the more you program, the bigger things get. Okay, they just when you start dealing with more complex ones, and as you have more complex programs, when you change something, sometimes it can just explode on you. And the important thing is that clients, whenever you have a client, no matter what they say, no matter how much you talk to them and say, please, get all of these requirements for the program, they always change their mind. And so here you have this big complex program, and your client says, okay, now we want to change, and you've already written this thing. So what you can do with a program, with an object-oriented, a design pattern program, is you can go in and make the change because they're set up to be loosely bound to one another, and that's a loose binding is a very important concept in design patterns. And they have things just like you have a structure. You say, gee, how will I deal with this thing where I have a decision to make? Well, you use a conditional statement. And with design patterns, it's the same thing. You have certain kinds of very practical things that you do a lot. If you'd like, I could give you some very specific examples that might help out.
I think that would be really great.
Okay. I had a client, and the client wanted a survey done. And so I wrote a survey, and there were like 105 fields in this table that I had to build. And so what I did, I used what's called a strategy design pattern, and the strategies were encapsulated algorithms, essentially. It's what the strategy pattern is. And so I put together this survey, and the client was very happy with it. And so about a year later, the same client came back and said, oh, we want you to do another survey, but this one's different, and it deals with all kinds of different things. Plus the fact that we wanted to be sure that that somebody can see it on an iPad, because they were going to do the surveys using iPad. So I had this design pattern. Now, even though the table was like 105 fields, the new one was only like 20 or 30 fields. It was much smaller. But with the design pattern, I could make those changes, and here was this fairly complex program. Nothing broke, and so it saved me a lot of time. And this is probably the most important thing about this. The design patterns were developed not by academics, but rather a combination of people working in the field with real clients, with real problems, academics, and different kinds of people all got together recognizing what this problem was. Let me give you another example. This is a more up-to-date one, I suppose. Right now, we have one of the big issues is what do we do about mobile devices? And there's something that's called a sniffer. And what the sniffer does, it goes through and it looks at what kind of device is looking at your website. And so what you have to do is that you have to have some kind of device that sniffs out the devices looking at your website. These are called sniffers. And of course, the problem is that you have an iPhone and Androids and Kindles and some things like that, but it just keeps growing all the time. And so what are you going to do? So you put this really nice program together on your big screen, or you have a big screen display. On your mobile, you got a mobile display, and everything's working beautiful. And then along comes another device. And so how are you going to insert that device into this program so that it picks it up too? And so what I used to do this was what's called a chain of command. And what the chain of command does, it goes through and it finds your sniffer. Well, let's say that I have a new one that comes up, and I have to put it between these other two. Well, I can do it without breaking anything. And so that saves a huge amount of time. And of course, my clients they're delighted with the fact. Actually, they're never delighted. What they always do is they say, "Oh, that's they just expect you to be able to do that without even, so you do it." And so those are a couple examples that I came across. My bacon was just totally saved by having design patterns.
So you mentioned a couple of specific design patterns there. Can you give me an outline of sort of some of the more common design patterns that exist?
Well, this is where it gets tricky. Okay, what I did, I stuck with what I'll call the original design patterns, and these were a number of design patterns that were developed by a group that they refer to as Gang of Four, and it was published in a book that was called Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software. Now, since that time, there have been things that have been called design patterns that were sort of not quite, all right? And so I stuck with that. And some of the ones they have, for example, one is called the factory method. And what the factory method does is separates the creation of an object from the object itself. In other words, you have a factory go out and it, quote unquote, a factory does a creation for you. And so you don't get the two mixed up. You want to make a change. The object that you've instantiated or you created has no idea that the change is made because it all goes through the factory. Those that was one factory method. Another one I mentioned already is the strategy pattern. One of my favorite is called the state machine, or it's called the state design pattern. It's based on state machines or state engines. Proxy is another one. This is very popular for logins, and what it does, it goes to the proxy, and if the person has the wrong answer or is using some kind of injection attack, they have a very hard time finding where the real one is. It's part of a pattern that's used a lot with security. So those are a couple of the common ones that they have. Another one that's very common, and it's a delight to use, is called the template method. And the template method sets up something that maintains what's called the Hollywood, what is it called? The Hollywood principle. That's it. And so in the Hollywood principle is that the lower, the child classes don't call the adult classes. And that comes from the agent saying, don't call us, we'll call you. So, that's the Hollywood principle. That's the name of it. That's in the template method. It's also a very handy thing to have.
So final question. So other than, of course, reading your book to learn about PHP design patterns, how would you suggest someone sort of transition into using these with PHP?
Okay. There are a lot of different books out there. The sort of the granddaddy of all of them is called Design Patterns: Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software, and that one is written in Smalltalk. Now, a lot of people say, well, design patterns. How can you? Here you have all of these languages with strict typing and so forth, and how does PHP fit in there? Well, one of the things is that Smalltalk also has dynamic typing, just like PHP. So it's learning Smalltalk can be challenging. I'll put it that way, and so people don't want to fool around with that. Actually, I learned design patterns working with Java, and there's a wonderful book. In fact, I think O'Reilly publishes it, part of the Head First series. And that is a fantastic book. It's called Head First Design Patterns, and the people that wrote it, the Freemans, are just that is one of the best books out there. In fact, I think it's the best book on general design patterns next to the original. That's a wonderful book. Now, again, the problem is that you have to learn Java, or at least enough Java to get by. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to have a PHP book that was very close and very closely linked to these other ones that weren't some loosey-goosey version of design patterns.
That's great. I think it's really helpful for the community. So
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for talking to me, and good luck with the book.
Thank you. My pleasure.